goes on and they become adults, all that exposure in the womb is expressed later on in their health.
That's right.
And the highest increase in death rates after Fukushima was reported in basically are the soldiers who returned to Texas from the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. They're the most exposed. They're already carrying a body burden that's almost killed them. And that little bit of Fukushima radiation just was the last straw. And so
Christina Consolo, I can't thank you enough for being here on The Real Deal.
Go to Bellevue,
Even though what you're telling us is overwhelming, depressing,
10-minute lectures being
catastrophic, I
filmed
can't thank you enough.
on engineering. So I submitted each topic. You're going to put me in some green room, I guess. I'm going to decide if I need to green facial. I should. I should dress up really funny. Or the green suits, so just my head's flying around. Worldometers, right? Worldometers. And today I'll grab some real numbers. Current world population. And I'm going to grab this at 10:30 a.m.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're watching AMTV Alternative Media Television. I have a breaking report on the Fukushima radioactive nuclear disaster, which I believe is probably the worst nuclear disaster we have had in history.
And is leaking actively radiation into the Pacific Ocean, contaminating our coastline, contaminating our ecosystem, contaminating our fish and our food supply. And you're only getting, I would suspect, half a percent of the truth.
If Alternative Media TV
Right
is where
here.
you're getting
Here
your
are your
information,
citations
he's
to
probably
use
right.
for
Please help
73.
us investigate
People
this,
still are forgetting to
get this
put their
out
reference.
everywhere, make this video viral. You can take a look at some of the
Reference it.
amazing images yourself, some of the Fukushima radiation maps.
Hang
I'll
steady,
provide
hang
all the
steady.
links below. Here we have a nuclear fallout map showing the trajectory of the
7:46.
radiation
Okay, so I'm just gonna type
approaching
that
the
in.
West Coast, parts of California, etc. Again, you know half the truth, America.
349.
Oh boy, where to start? Firstly,
280.
I like that map of Fukushima.
so
You know, the
here's
one which is a key titled Wave Height
days,
in Centimeters.
the number,
Because it's got
day 0
nothing
right now.
to do with the radiation
Day
at
2.
Fukushima.
I'm just gonna let
That's
this
the wave
number
height
equal
of the
that
2011
number
tsunami.
times-
But I've got to admit,
gosh,
your second chart is
1.001.
truly terrifying,
So
where
I
the
don't know what it's
entire
like, just
western
say it's
half of the United States was
gonna
subjected
be
to
day
750 rads.
I'm gonna
That's
say this
7.5
equals
grays
that
of
number
radiation. Just so you know, that area of the
times
west coast on that map there has a population of about 80 million
Okay.
people.
So I've got my data.
7.5 grays
pretty easy.
would kill
Pretty simple.
approximately 90% of them. Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna plot
remember
it.
that when the entire
I'm
west
gonna do
coast of the
CO2
United
also.
States was annihilated 10 days after the Fukushima meltdown with a death toll of about 70 million. Oh, hang on. No,
31
wait, sorry. No, I
kajillion.
don't remember that because it didn't happen. Because this map is for when
You're only getting, I would suspect,
30.
half a percent of the truth.
But if you think alternative media is done yet, not even slightly.
Fukushima radiation found in California kelp.
And
The San
I'm just gonna take
Francisco
this.
Gate.
Actually, I'm gonna
Kelp
take
off
these two
California
cells,
was contaminated with
copy them over
short-lived
here,
radioisotopes
split it over
a
there,
month
and look,
after Japan's
magically the
Fukushima
same
Daiichi
formulas there.
nuclear power plant
cool.
accident, a sign that the spilled
made
radiation
'em up
reached the
because I
state's
don't-
coastline, according to a new scientific study. Scientists from CSU Long Beach tested giant kelp
Insert.
collected off Orange County, Santa Cruz, and other locations after the March 2011 accident
And please
and
use this
detected
style
radioactive iodine, which was released from the damaged nuclear reactor.
Which really isn't that surprising. You see, the vast majority of the radiation from this reactor stayed in the reactor for the kind of obvious reason that the reactor is a big hunk of solid stuff, and that doesn't fly across the Pacific too well. Well,
Yeah.
a small amount of it did get airborne in fires and such like, and some of it got airborne enough to get into the jet stream where it would settle out a long way from home. And when the iodine settled into the sea, it's entirely expected that it would get sucked up by the seaweed, because that's the sort of thing that seaweed does. Indeed, would anyone like to hazard a guess as to where the element iodine was first discovered? Yep, you guessed it. It was first discovered in seaweed. So if you want to look for radioactive iodine, seaweed's kind of the place to look. But let's flick back to that short-lived isotope thing. You see, iodine-131 has a half-life of about 8 days, which means that in about 8 days, half of your iodine will have decayed, and in about 16 you'll only have a quarter left. In 24 days, you'll only have 1/8 left, and so on, till after about 2 years. Even if everything that was emitted from Fukushima found its way into the Californian kelp, not even one single radioactive nucleus of iodine-131 would be left by now. And seeing as iodine-131 has such a short half-life, and it's typically only created in nuclear reactors, the background level of this isotope is effectively 0.
The largest concentration was about 250 times higher than levels found in kelp before the accident.
Oh, wow. 250 times 0. That must be a colossal number. Yeah, I can see why the entire Californian coast turned it into a death zone. Oh, wait, sorry, you were ranting about how something may 250 times an almost insignificant background amount over 2 years ago is really important, and how it's still somehow contaminated, even though every single radioactive nucleus of iodine will have decayed by now.
It's already reached the Pacific coast. I know many of you already know that. It's already being found in kelp 250 times higher than normal levels. It's already reached California, is the takeaway.
Now, the take-home message is you don't have even the slightest clue about what you're talking about. And believe me, it doesn't get any better for the rest, where they talk about a late-season anchovies in Monterey Bay, and therefore conclude, it's got to be Fukushima.
And now we have strange, uncanny, and I would suggest related events, unprecedented events happening on the California coastline, where millions of anchovies are now on the coastline of places like Monterey, California, in this crazy biblical environment where it's almost like Noah's Ark.
Yeah, a late season of anchovies. Therefore, Fukushima, because there is nothing else that could have possibly caused this. Like, say, for instance, the last decade being one of the hottest in recorded history. Now, let's not bother with measuring what the radioactive ions in the water are, or in what quantities they're present. Things that can be done with stunning accuracy. Nah, we're alternative media. Let's just blame Fukushima. Forest fire, Fukushima. Someone gets a back pain, Fukushima. Someone gains weight, Fukushima. Someone loses a sock in the dryer, Fukushima. The only thing left is for you to wonder, why isn't the mainstream media reporting this? Well, maybe it's because they're not idiots. Maybe it's because they actually investigate their stories. Maybe it's because they can tell the difference between wave height and radiation levels. Maybe it's because they can tell the difference between what happened and what didn't. Which really does mean that the only thing left for alternative media TV to do is to decide exactly what % of the truth they need to know to blame everything on Fukushima.
Again, you know half the truth, America, and you're only getting, I would suspect, 0.5% of the truth. And so we only know probably 1% of the real truth here. And that is what should be most shocking and most alarming.
You didn't use colors, you use one as a dashed and one as a solid, but we'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so there's this. And now let's do the same thing for our carbon.
You know, radiation is one hell of a boogeyman because you simply can't escape it.
Add a trend
You're
line.
bathed in radiation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's called the background radiation, and the more of it you're exposed to, the more likely you are to die of cancer. So,
So we've got a
radiation
lot
like
of
this is kind of
good
like
progress. The other
driving.
thing I'm going
The
to
more
need
of
to
it you
do
do,
is
the
I've
more
got,
likely you are to
I've got
die
a
in
lot
a
of
car
significant
crash, or
digits on
in
there.
the case
I'm
of
going to go to at
radiation,
least
the
3
more likely you are
significant
to die
digits,
from
but right now
cancer.
there's only
There is
one.
no safe limit.
I'm gonna
There is
right-click
only
on that.
acceptable risks.
And
So,
under
for instance, we
number,
know how many road miles are driven each year in
make sure this
America
is a
and how many
number.
people die. We can therefore get a
And
reasonable estimate
it's a little
of
bit
your
of
chances
overkill,
of dying
but now I've
per
got
mile driven on the
enough
road,
significant
and
digits
similarly for
that,
radiation. So let's
I can
compare
say I don't
these
need
two
to buy that many,
hazards.
so I'll
The
just
average
say
background
0
radiation you're exposed to
on that.
each
So now I
year
have Y
is about the
equals-
same chance of dying
this-
from
so
cancer
this is the line.
as driving 1,000 miles gives you from
That
dying in a road accident.
equation
And seeing as your average
is the
American
equation for
drives
that
over
black
10,000 miles per year, this would mean that you
is
could live
the
in an
equation
area
for
with
the blue
10
line.
times the background radiation, and even at that you would only have a comparable chance of dying from cancer as you would have
make the
from
text
dying in a car
blue as
accident
well.
on the roads. Now, keeping that in mind, let's
got a
step
black
back a
here
year
and
or
blue
two
down there.
and take a look at the
And again,
news
I'll
articles when the
right-click on
USS
that.
Ronald Reagan was first subjected to the radiation cloud
Format.
from Fukushima.
Format.
The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet says 17 crew members have been exposed to low
Label.
levels of radiation that was released from the
Turn
Fukushima
it into a
nuclear
number.
power plant.
That's what it is.
The crew was on 3 helicopters from the aircraft
We'll zero
carrier
out the
USS Ronald
decimals
Reagan.
and
They were
make that
conducting
many- that
rescue
many
operations
numbers.
outside
Okay.
Sendai City.
So,
According to the 7th
set this
Fleet,
thing up.
they were detected with
The-
low
the sort
levels
of
of
the hard part
contamination, but it
is
says
coming now.
the radioactive
I'll show you
materials
exactly
can easily be removed
We know
with
that the
soap and
equation for a
water.
line
The DoD says the
is,
maximum potential
MX
radiation dose for personnel on the ship
was MX
was
plus
less
B.
than
Thank
1
you.
month's
Exactly.
exposure to natural background radiation from rocks, soil, and sun.
I'm gonna make all-
And
make all
the
font
very low
a little
levels of
larger so
residual
you can see
radioactivity that did deposit on the ship were mitigated and
It
controlled.
has not detected any more
a
contamination.
little.
Which
Yeah,
sounds
that's
about
that
right
works.
to me. I mean, let's just say you have a burning core
Okay, so
for the
you
sake
see
of
something
argument.
better.
Most of
What
that
I'm
will
gonna do,
settle out locally. And by the time
for
you're 15
N,
miles
I'm gonna
away,
put
it's obviously
what
going to be significantly
equals,
less. There
and
is a
Y
limit to how
equals
irradiated you can get
5,
by flying a
9,
helicopter
9,
around 50 miles
7,
north
4,
of the
3,
reactor. Now let's see how this is being
B
reported at the
equals
moment.
Now a group of
7,
U.S. Navy veterans are saying exposure to leaking radiation from the plant has made them sick.
Some of the first responders in Japan after the tsunami and earthquake are now developing serious health
Here,
issues
M
because of the
equals
Fukushima
2,
nuclear
3,
reactor.
The nuclear power plant meltdown in Fukushima, Japan in March of 2011 not only contaminated many Japanese citizens there, but dozens of U.S. sailors as well.
They were there to help in the rescue effort, but
A little
now
bit of
many are
overkill,
suffering
but it's
serious
all right. So
symptoms
here's
of
M.
radiation sickness
Here's P.
with no acknowledgement
What I asked
of
you
the
to do
connection
in
from the
this
Defense
problem
Department and no diagnosis from their doctors.
I believe we just showed you the radioactive snow.
is
And, I
predict
mean,
what
you
the
saw
values are
how
gonna be
much
at
it
the end of the
was.
semester.
I mean, they're literally surrounded
So
by the
we've got
radioactive material.
approximately 45
So it's
days.
understandable why so many of the
Let's say
guys on the
40
aircraft
days
carrier,
until the end
women,
of the semester.
got so sick.
So, 40,
And nuclear fallout
40 days
ain't
from when
nothing
you
to mess
started
with.
the
Oh, come on, Chink. You think that's radioactive
Experiment.
snow? Look, when the
Research
plant blew up,
experiment. So,
it was mostly a
at
hydrogen,
40 days,
oxygen,
what
chemical
would be- with the
explosion.
linear model
It wasn't a
affect
nuke going off that irradiated tons of
population?
ash and
Well,
sucked it
equals-
miles into the air. What you're looking at here isn't radioactive snow. It's people scrubbing the deck with soap and
Times
water. For the bloody obvious reason
number of
that
days
if you get radioactive dust on
plus
top of your ship,
the
you get
initial value.
irradiated by it.
Y
However, if you
equals
wash
MX
it
plus B.
overboard, you don't. These are
3 inputs.
obvious
I've done it
and
once.
very standard
Really cool thing about
decontamination
Excel,
procedures. I mean, we're not coming
Control C, I
at
just
this
did a Control C
blind.
copy.
We actually know quite a lot
Right
about
arrow,
the hazards of
Control
radiation
V.
on ships thanks to experiments
Let's see, did
like
that work?
this. Further,
not quite.
the aircraft carrier is a nuclear aircraft carrier with 2 nuclear power plants on board.
And I'll
It's a
format these
multi-billion
guys.
dollar vessel with billions of dollars
That's the
more
easy part.
in aircraft. Doubtless, they will have very good monitoring
Well,
on
again-
these nuclear
again,
power plants
it's
and
Y
throughout
equals
the
MX
ship
plus B.
for damage
That's just the
control.
slope of the line.
For this
I mean,
massive
it's just-
irradiation of the
it's-
ship to have
it's-
happened,
it's
it would
college
require that
algebra
the
121
nuclear
over
safety
there.
officers, who
Yep.
typically have a pretty good
Yep.
grasp of the hazards of radiation, to sit on their hands while very sensitive radiation
Well,
alarms
one
would be going off
number,
all around
some commas
them.
in
And
there.
or for the captain to sit on his hands
Okay,
while
so
a
that was halfway
multi-billion dollar
through
ship
the hard part.
himself and his entire crew
Here's the
got
next part. I mean, here's
needlessly
like the hard part, but let me show you
So that
how
they were
easy it is.
drinking
'Cause this is-
contaminated water that
this
was
will be
fed into the ship
one
from
of
the
the 6
sea.
graphs you'll
Now you
make.
can see a sailor
Got
here in the
my
middle of that water as
mouse
the
on
plate
that
deck was
with
being
the
decontaminated.
crosshairs.
But that wasn't actually the
Control C.
biggest problem. From my reading of the case, it
Put the mouse
appears the
over
biggest
here,
problem was
Control V.
the radiation was in the water. And they take the
Same
water
data.
in and desalinate it and then use it in the
What
faucets,
I
the
get to
showers,
do
etc.
now-
So they were all showering, literally showering in that radioactive water,
Click on
and
that.
that's why this happened.
But what about this radiation getting into the drinking water? Well, as many of you will know, you can't just drink seawater. It's
Click on
too
this.
salty. You need to remove that salt somehow. And desalination on a ship like this is probably done with reverse osmosis, where a device uses pressure and a membrane to filter out the salt ions in the water. That is,
Drag it down.
any dust would certainly be removed by this process. Now, the majority of the radioactivity
So
will
this
come in
is
the form
the
of
linear
radioactive
approximation
ions, which are then
for
dissolved from the
what
dust
the
into the water. But the desalination will remove those ions from the
population is
water,
gonna be,
at
look right
least
there
as
and
well
see the
as it
number.
removes the sodium chloride ions, which is, of course, what you've got to remove to stop the seawater from being salty.
Well, the
After
number
that, it's only
popped out of the
tritium you've got to
map.
worry about.
7
But then
billion,
again, why would tritium be
648
settling out in a dust cloud?
million,
Put simply, virtually all of the radioactive dust and the radioactive ions
and then you can check
in water would have
in
been
40 days and
removed
see how
by the
close the linear
filtration
model
process.
is.
Now, to be honest, I don't know
so
that much about the specs
now-
of their water purification units, but if they had any sense,
Next.
they would also be fitted with radiation monitors.
So at this point, it's just
Why?
going to copy paste.
Because if
Just
someone
copy,
does try and nuke your ships,
come down
as
here,
was probably in mind when they were
paste.
designing these things, and by some miracle you survive
this
by
guy,
a near miss or something,
copy,
you will need to make
and then
sure
come down
that
here
your
and do a
water
paste.
purifiers are
Because the
working
other two
properly
models-
and that they're not letting in radioactive water.
Yeah. So on this
Then of course
guy-
you've got to consider the specs of the ship and of the radioactive plume. The further you get away from a plume, the plume of
click on
course
that
gets
trend line,
larger
just I'm gonna
and
try
therefore
to.
more diluted. And to get a decent
Format the
whack
trend
from it,
line.
you would need to be pretty close.
And now it's exponential.
So the concentrated plume is unlikely to be more than a mile or two wide, depending on the
click on
wind
this trend
conditions.
line,
However, the USS Ronald
exponential.
Reagan could
And these numbers
cruise
change.
at about 30 miles per
Then you'll
hour,
just go
which
in
means it could sail
and
across a plume
get
that
the,
size in about 5 minutes.
get the
I mean,
values.
I just somehow doubt the conversation on the
that
bridge went something
label,
like this.
number.
Where should I
I'm
park,
gonna need a
Captain?
few more decimal
yeah,
places,
we
'cause it
should
just
park
says
downwind of
even
that
to
burning
0x.
nuclear reactor.
So I'll just run
Of course,
that
be
out.
sure to maneuver the ship to account for changes in wind
A little
direction.
bit more.
And then finally, I found this news report
Now you can see you've
from a
got
few
3
years back
significant
that
digits.
says the aircraft carrier was over 100 miles away from the reactor at
749
the
and a
time.
3 sig dig.
The aircraft carrier was at sea
There's a
about
copy.
160 kilometers
There's a
northeast
paste.
of the plant. A hydrogen blast
This would be the
occurred at one of
polynomial.
its reactors on Saturday. The U.S. Navy says the Ronald Reagan and other 7th Fleet ships have been relocated.
You've also got to be a little careful about not being
Well, tune up on
misled
it.
by
There
what
it
you
is. Now
see
now
in
you've got a
pictures
polynomial
like
equation.
this.
You can plot that too.
Remember that when these reactors
ABC.
blew up, it was a hydrogen-oxygen explosion like this. These are simple chemical explosions.
and then,
They blew off the outer
just to
containment
finish
of the
up,
reactor, and the majority of what you're
you'll just
looking
see
at
in your
here
final
is just the
report,
outer
you'll see-
containment
you'll see
being
this
blown up.
as a
What
linear.
should be most worrying
See,
about
this is
this
a
is that
polynomial,
previously
and you'll see your
all the leaks would have been
final one is a,
contained
as a
within that
logarithm.
outer containment, and now that it's been
So
blown
what you'll
off,
have to do,
the
though,
radioactive material
what you'll
can
have to do
leak
up
directly
here
out into the
is take
environment.
this,
So I really wouldn't be so much guided
copy
by
it,
how dark and sinister the
paste
cloud
it.
looks like, because that's not how radiation works. What you should really base this on is the readings on the Geiger counter. And 100 miles away on the USS
Paste it.
Ronald Reagan, I'm pretty sure their nuclear safety officers would be saying exactly
And
the same
this first one will
things.
be your
Lastly, the symptoms they're describing
linear.
are just utterly inconsistent with radiation
your
exposure.
exponential.
Look, if you get a massive whack of radiation,
poly.
you die from
all you'll-
radiation
all you'll need
sickness.
to
And that
do
happens fairly quickly
is come down
in
and
a
plot.
few days to a few weeks, that sort of thing. If you survive the radiation sickness, you live on pretty much as normal, albeit with a higher chance
And
of
obviously
cancer.
here you'll have
It's
a,
explained at some length in this video.
You like
you'll
this?
have,
Look, they said that they
T.
knew
These
fairly early
equations
on, but they
will
couldn't
change.
get the
You'll just
aircraft
plug it
carrier
in.
out in enough days, right?
Exponential numbers
Because people got so sick, everybody on board started having uncontrollable diarrhea. They said they were,
and here.
and I hate to put it this way, but it's
A,
literally a quote,
B,
shitting themselves in the
C.
hallways.
Oh my God.
Like, and so
Now that sounds consistent with radiation sickness. But the problem is that if your radiation sickness is so acute that it'll give you diarrhea, it also has
I'm just
a
gonna
bloody
upload
good
this to the
chance
forum
of
right
killing
now.
you. That is, if the 5,000 strong crew had been subjected to doses large enough to induce radiation sickness bad enough to give you diarrhea, you would be looking at an acute radiation poisoning death toll in hundreds to thousands, whereas the actual death toll was 0. Look, how many people get diarrhea on a warship with a complement of 5,000? Is that even remotely surprising? What makes you think it was radiation that actually caused this, given how easy it is to detect radiation on a nuclear aircraft carrier? However, the bottom line is none died. And 3 years later on, if you're going to claim that this is radiation-induced, it's cancer or nothing. Yet these are some of the symptoms that they are describing.
I have disc degenerative disease in my lower back, and I have no family history of it, and I have no accident that could have caused it, and I have some digestive problems as well, and stomach pain as well.
Right now I have a lot of weight issues and thyroid issues that I didn't have before I came in, and issues that I didn't have after I had my child.
Sure, that's not a nice place to be in, but it's not cancer. Look, the USS Ronald Reagan has about 5,000 personnel on it, and over a period of about 3 years, how many of them do you think will get sick after extended stays in a large metal box with lots of other people? Which does carry its own risks, as Maya cynically describes here.
New rule. Cruise ships have to be renamed floating death traps. If your friends could see you now, they turn away in horror as sharks devour your carcass and then develop some strange virus that no one has ever heard of.
The thing that really clinches this for me, though, is just how reluctant these people are to put numbers on it. If you know the radiation exposure, you can get a pretty good estimate of the cancer rates. The best I've seen is that levels of